Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be talking about data. More specifically, the role of data in ABA therapy.
Okay.
So,
sounds good.
I guess kind of the main question that pops into my head is like, why is data collection so important?
Yeah, I think a good analogy for this is like, imagine trying to bake a cake, but you don't measure any of the ingredients.
Oh.
It's probably not going to turn out too well.
Right.
So data in ABA, it kind of serves that same function where it really allows us to just objectively measure the behavior and the progress.
Okay. So it's like having that recipe that we can follow and we can measure and see like, okay, this is
exactly
how it's supposed to go.
Exactly. And each of those individual data points that we're gathering during observation is known as a datum.
Datum.
Yeah. So, it's just, think of it as like each individual piece of information that we're collecting.
Okay.
And the thing that's really interesting about this is that even slight changes in behavior can actually be really meaningful when we're tracking those over time.
So even if it's like minuscule, we're still tracking it because over time it could actually turn into something.
Right. And this is why consistent data collection is so crucial.
Yeah.
Because it helps us really assess and plan for interventions.
Okay. So it's helping us answer those questions. Like, is what we're doing even working? Should we change something up?
Absolutely.
And then also, like, how can we prove that what we're doing is making a difference?
Right.
Like proving to maybe like the parents or other people like, hey, this is actually working.
Yeah. And, a lot of times parents will say, well, I don't see any progress. But then when you show them the data, it's like, oh, wow, there actually has been quite a bit of progress.
Okay. So now I'm curious, who's responsible for collecting all this data?
Yeah.
Is it always like the ABA therapist?
It's not always the ABA therapist. It's often a team effort. So we might have RBTs involved, parents, caregivers, teachers, and even sometimes the client themselves.
Okay, so it really does take a village.
It does.
I would think, though, with so many people, like, how do we make sure that the data is actually accurate? Like, everyone's on the same page with what we're looking for.
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's where training, supervision, and calibration come in.
Calibration.
Yeah, so calibration is basically making sure everyone's on the same page when they're observing and recording behavior.
Okay.
So let's say we have two people that are observing the same child, and one person's recording, 5 instances of hand flapping, and the other person's recording 10.
Oh.
That's a problem, right?
Yeah, definitely.
We need to make sure that the data is reliable no matter who's collecting it.
So we're making sure that the data is good no matter who's taking it, so that when we go back and look at it and analyze it, we're like, okay, this makes sense.
Right.
Okay, cool.
And then with calibration, it involves, practicing together, comparing your observations, giving each other feedback until everyone's measuring and recording the same way.
So we're making sure that we're all looking at the same thing.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
And this leads us to the different methods that we use to actually collect this data.
Okay.
So there's 2 fundamental approaches, direct observation and then self-recording.
Okay, so direct observation, I feel like that's pretty self-explanatory. Like, we're watching the behavior happen and we're marking it down as it's happening.
Yep, that's pretty much it. So you're directly observing and recording the behavior in real time.
Okay.
And this is ideal for behaviors that are easily observable, things like talking out of turn, completing a task.
So if a kid is like getting up out of their seat constantly, I'm watching them and marking down every time they get up.
Exactly.
Okay.
But, with that, there's some downsides to that as well.
Okay. What would those be?
It can be very time consuming. You have to dedicate specific blocks of time just to observe and record.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
And then it can also be disruptive. Imagine someone's constantly watching you. You might start to act a little differently.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So then we have self-recording, and this is when the individual actually tracks their own behavior.
Okay.
So you can think of it like a food journal or a mood tracker.
Oh.
And it can be very empowering for clients because it gives them an active role in their own progress.
Okay, so instead of them feeling like someone's watching me, they're like, okay, I'm doing this myself. I can see how I'm doing.
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
But of course, there are some drawbacks to this method as well.
Okay.
Such as it can be prone to bias.
Oh, yeah.
People might not be accurate or consistent with their recording.
For sure.
And it also requires careful training. We need to make sure that the person understands what they're tracking and how to actually do it properly.
So, like, this is what we're looking for. This is how we're going to do it.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. So we have direct observation, self-recording. With all this new technology coming out, are there any other ways that people are using data and recording data?
Yeah, technology is definitely changing the landscape of ABA data collection. We're seeing increased use of computer programs,
Yeah.
video recordings, and even wearable tech.
Oh, wow.
So things like smartwatches that can track movement or heart rate.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
So data collection is just like the first step, right? What do we do with all this information that we've gathered?
That's where graphing comes in.
Okay.
Because graphs really allow us to take that raw data and kind of transform it into a story, and it reveals these trends and patterns, and we can actually see the impact of our interventions.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
What kind of graphs are used in ABA?
There's several types, and each one highlights a different aspect of behavior change.
Oh,
So one example would be a standard acceleration chart.
okay.
And this is really great for tracking fluency and learning progress.
So like if we're teaching a kid how to read, we can see how many words per minute they're getting
Exactly.
using that chart.
Exactly. And it uses a logarithmic scale, which allows us to see even those small improvements over time. And we have cumulative records, and these are fantastic for revealing those subtle changes in response rates and patterns of reinforcement.
Okay.
So imagine we're tracking how often a student raises their hand in class.
Okay.
A cumulative record will not only show us how many times they raise their hand, but the rate at which they're responding.
Oh, very cool.
And then we also have bar graphs, which are widely used in ABA.
Okay.
And these are great for comparing data across different conditions or individuals.
Gotcha. So like if we're using two different strategies with the kiddo, we can see which one's actually working better.
Exactly.
Cool.
Yeah.
So, okay, we've collected the data. We have all these graphs. Now what?
Now we have to analyze and interpret what we're seeing.
Okay.
Because remember, those graphs are just the starting point.
Okay.
The real power comes when we start digging deeper and we're extracting meaning from those visual representations.
Okay, so what kind of questions should we be asking ourselves when we're looking at all this data?
Some key things to consider would be the level of the behavior. Has it increased or decreased since we started the intervention?
Okay.
And then what's the trend? Is the change happening gradually, rapidly? Is there a lot of fluctuation?
Okay.
And then finally, look at the variability. How consistent is this behavior across different sessions or different conditions?
Okay, so we're looking at the trend and the variability.
Right.
Gotcha. Okay. How do those factors actually help us make decisions?
So let's say we're looking at data on Fern's productivity at work.
Okay.
And the graph shows that her productivity is consistently lower on Mondays
Oh, interesting. Okay.
compared to the other days of the week.
Okay, so what would that tell us?
Well, it could suggest that something specific about Mondays is influencing her behavior.
Like maybe she has a meeting first thing Monday morning.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Or maybe the workload is heavier on Mondays.
Okay.
So, analyzing the data can help us identify those triggers or patterns that we might not otherwise notice.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Right. And once we understand those patterns, we can start brainstorming solutions.
Okay.
Maybe we adjust Fern's schedule to give her more support on Mondays, or we explore ways to reduce her workload
Oh, okay.
at the beginning of the week.
Gotcha.
The key is to use the data to guide our decision-making
Right.
and tailor the intervention to Fern's needs.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But I also want to make sure that we remember that behavior is complex, and it's not always influenced by just one thing.
That is a very important point.
Right.
We always need to consider those extraneous variables, those external factors that might be playing a role.
Like with Fern, maybe it's not just the workload on Mondays. Maybe there's something else going on.
Right. Maybe she's not getting enough sleep on Sunday nights, or there's a stressful situation at home
Oh, for sure.
that's impacting her focus. So
Oh,
it's about looking at the whole picture,
Gotcha.
not just the data in isolation.
Yeah, so we're taking the data and then combining it with everything else we know about this person to come up with something that's actually going to help them.
Exactly.
Okay, this is super interesting.
So, when we're looking at all this data and trying to make sense of it, there are some common pitfalls that we really want to avoid.
Okay, like what? What are some things that we should be aware of?
Well, one common mistake is focusing too much on just the short-term changes and not really looking at the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Like, let's say you're working with a child on reducing tantrums and you see a decrease in tantrums for a couple of days.
Oh, yeah, we'd be excited.
Right. Like, oh, this is great. It's working.
We get it.
But we need to look at the data over a longer period of time
Okay.
to see if that decrease is actually consistent or if it was just a fluke.
Oh, okay. So it could just been a good day or two.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe there were other things going on that were impacting their behavior.
Right.
So, yeah.
So we can't celebrate too early.
Right. Exactly.
Got to look at the whole picture.
Another pitfall is ignoring the influence of extraneous variables.
Okay.
So those external factors that we talked about before.
Right, like with Fern.
Yeah, like with Fern.
And Mondays.
If we just focus on that data showing that her productivity is low, and we just assume it's because of her workload or meeting schedule,
Yeah.
we might miss other important factors.
Right.
Like maybe she's dealing with a stressful family situation, or she's not getting enough sleep.
For sure. So we have to remember there could be other things going on that we need to be aware of.
Right. It's not always a direct cause and effect, between the intervention and the behavior change.
Gotcha.
And this brings us to another point, correlation versus causation.
Okay.
Just because two things happen around the same time
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily mean that one caused the other.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Can you give me an example?
Yeah. So let's say you're working with a client on improving their social skills, and you notice an increase in their social interactions at the same time that they start a new medication.
Okay.
It's tempting to think, oh, the medication must be working.
Yeah, for sure.
But we can't just jump to that conclusion.
Oh.
It could be that the medication is helping with something else.
Okay.
Like maybe it's reducing their anxiety,
Okay.
which is then making it easier for them to interact with others.
Oh, that makes sense.
Or maybe they started a new club or activity
Okay.
that's providing more social opportunities.
Oh, yeah.
So,
There could be lots of different things
there could be lots of different things.
contributing to that.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's where, critical thinking and a deep understanding of the individual's context is really important.
Right. So it's not just looking at the data in a silo. It's like looking at all the different pieces.
Right. Data can provide valuable insights, but it's just one piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
We have to look at everything else as well.
Gotcha. Okay. So we talked about not celebrating too early. Looking at extraneous variables, correlation versus causation. Are there any other pitfalls that we should try to avoid?
One more would be the tendency to overemphasize data that confirms our expectations
Okay.
and kind of downplay data that doesn't.
Oh, yeah.
We all have biases, and it's easy to unintentionally cherry pick the data that supports what we already believe.
Oh, for sure.
You know?
It's like confirmation bias.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
So we need to be aware of this and actively seek out data that might challenge those assumptions.
Okay.
That's the only way to make sure that we're being objective and we're making truly data-informed decisions.
So being okay with being wrong sometimes.
Yes.
Because that could actually help us make better decisions.
Exactly, because it might help us reevaluate our approach and come up with even more effective interventions.
Okay, so being wrong can be a good thing.
Sometimes.
Okay, it's been really helpful. I think it's good to know, okay, we have the data, we're looking at it, but let's also remember all these other things. That could be affecting the data.
Absolutely. Data is a really powerful tool, but it's up to us to use it responsibly and ethically.
For sure. And to help our clients the best that we can.
Exactly. By understanding these potential pitfalls, we can ensure that we're making those informed decisions for our clients.
Awesome. It really seems like data analysis in ABA is a mix of, art and science.
Yeah.
We have to be really specific and have the data, but then also use our clinical judgment.
Right. It's that blend of objective data and subjective understanding that helps us to create these really individualized interventions for our clients.
Sure. So I know that we've talked about the different people that are involved in collecting data, like the RBTs and the parents and the teachers.
Right.
How do we make sure that everyone's collaborating and collecting the data the right way?
Yeah, as we've talked about, reliable data is really the foundation of everything that we do in ABA.
Yeah.
So clear communication is really important. Everyone involved needs to understand the behaviors that we're targeting, how we're defining those behaviors, and then also how we're going to record them.
Okay, so it's not just like, hey, can you just watch and see if she bites her nails? It's like,
right.
This is what we're looking for. This is how you're going to do it.
Exactly. It's being really specific.
Gotcha.
And providing, clear written instructions, visual aids, hands-on training can go a long way in making sure everyone's on the same page.
Oh, for sure.
And then also regular check-ins and supervision are essential.
Okay.
Because this gives us a chance to review the data together, address any discrepancies, and then provide feedback to make sure everyone's feeling good about what they're doing.
Okay, so what happens if, let's say, an RBT is saying one thing and a parent is saying something completely different?
Yeah, that's where those calibration exercises can really come in handy.
Okay.
If we're seeing those discrepancies, we really need to go back to the basics and practice together and fine-tune everyone's observation skills.
Gotcha. So it's not like, you're doing it wrong. It's like, let's work together to make this better.
Exactly.
Okay, I like that.
And it's creating a culture of open communication where people can feel comfortable asking questions,
For sure.
raising any concerns that they have without feeling judged.
I think that's really important.
Yeah.
This has been a really cool deep dive. I feel like we learned a lot.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Just to wrap things up for everyone listening, what would your advice be to all the ABA professionals out there?
I would just say reflect on your current data collection practices.
Okay.
Are you gathering the most relevant information? Are you being consistent?
Yeah.
Are you looking at the data and using that to make decisions that are going to help your clients?
Okay. Good advice. And remember, learning is a journey. So,
It is.
keep looking for more information.
Exactly.
There's lots of resources out there.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to reach out to other professionals.
Right. Collaboration is key.
Yeah, exactly.
The more we learn about data, the better we can help our clients.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And we hope you enjoyed it.